That is the most bizarre, strange, disgusting, weird, violent, twisted, crooked stuff I've ever read in my life. I will never read it again. And I immediately
said, I have to read that.
And I thought, if she hates it, it's probably amazing.
Oh. So how did you encounter her first?
Yeah, so I remember it was about maybe 20 years ago. I remember a colleague of mine saying, after reading a Flannery O'Connor story, I didn't know who she was, maybe 25 years.
But you were already into literature at this point? This was your life?
I was 10 or 15 years into teaching at that point. And this particular colleague put the book down and said, that is the most bizarre, strange, disgusting, weird, violent, twisted, crooked stuff I've ever read in my life. I will never read it again. And I immediately
said, I have to read that.
Because I didn't have a tremendous amount of respect for that particular colleague. And I thought, if she hates it, it's probably amazing.
Oh.
So,
well, that reminds me of a story. Yeah. I was at a family gathering and a family member said, is anybody here familiar with Flannery O'Connor? And I said, oh, I hear she's great. Some of my biggest influencers who've influenced me say she's really, really good. And she said, she's crazy. She writes all this weird, bizarre stuff. And I was like, right. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have an answer for it.
Well, they weren't wrong.
Yeah, so why does she write about weird and bizarre stuff? What's going on? And how is that a proclamation of the gospel? And how does that speak to what can we learn today in our desire to reach the gospel in the way that she did? Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things that she said about her own writing that I think explains it best. And I just want to tell the viewers, the quotes I'm giving from O'Connor today, I think they're going to be mostly right, but you can look them up. If I don't get them word for word, you'll get the point. But she said this. She said, for the almost blind, you have to write in giant letters.
Ooh.
And for the almost deaf, you have to shout and scream. So she was looking at a culture, 1930s, 40s, 50s. You've got this, post-World War I and II, malaise, despair, disillusionment. And then this, I don't know how deeply we want to get into philosophy. We don't need to go there if you don't want to, but existentialism, which is
I'm not opposed. Go ahead, jump right in.
We'll just do the real quick definitions. There is no meaning or purpose to life. That's nihilism.
Yeah.
There's no God. This is it. Pure materialism. Existentialism goes one step further and says, well, I mean, we're kind of wired to want meaning. We really crave it deep down. So by an act of the will, this is Albert Camus, the French, by an act of the will, you create your own meaning.
Right,
you make your own meaning.
Well, that's the world we live in today.
We're still seeing the repercussions of that and really how it's fleshed out more, especially in a lot of the cultural issues that you deal with in your speaking. O'Connor is looking at where the culture is going. A culture, Western culture, which at one point, way back when, was largely Christian maybe in a very generic sense, but largely Christian, moving very rapidly away.
Do you think Flannery O'Connor would be surprised to see where we have gone? Or do you think she saw it so clearly that we're headed on this track already? She would just say, yeah, that's the proper math as to where we were in the 60s when I died. If she were alive today, do you think she would say, no, I saw it coming?
I think she already saw it coming. I think she would be dismayed.
Yeah.
I think she would be disheartened. But what she was doing in her stories, it's, you've heard of, shock jocks.
Yes.
Howard Stern.
Yeah, Howard, sure.
So O'Connor is writing stories that are very disturbing and they're shocking. And what's very fascinating to me is she's writing in the 50s, right? You think, what could someone in the 50s, what do we got? Ward Cleaver?
Yeah, Leave It to Beaver, right.
Trip over his, shoe string or something. But her stories are still disturbing to us today. There are...
Give me an example, like as one who hasn't...
Yeah, well, really, two of her stories have child suicide.
Oh, mercy.
So that's disturbing.
And this is her way of shouting to the deaf.
Yeah, and writing with the large letters. And her stories, but it's not gratuitous.
Yeah.
It's not just violence for the sake of violence. It's not just how gross can I be. It's not that at all. It's very calculated. It's very careful. It's incredibly well thought out, and her stories are just deep and rich with the picture of the gospel.
Let me draw a